this talk is mostly just about uh, an interest of mine for it has been an interest for quite a while. I think it started the origin of this interest is actually from building aquariums and like building like doing aquascaping, which is basically like um, sort of scaping your aquarium to kind of mimic a natural setting. And so terrarium is basically just that minus the water and the fishes and etc. Other maintenance things. I think what fascinated me was just the idea of having like a closed, like nature in a bottle type thing. And yeah, so I'll kind of go through roughly some bits, interesting tidbits about terrariums, and then like the science of how it works. And then if we have time, which I think we will definitely have, like just do some bonus things. Um, cool. Just before we start, has anyone like tried building or has built a terrarium before? Okay, no, this is the right audience. Cool. I'll try to blow your brains, but yeah, promises. Okay, so roughly this is how we'll do this. Um, so let's just start with what, like your quintessential definition. Sorry. One second. So essentially, terrarium is just a small enclosure usually made of glass for growing plants, although you can keep animals, but that's actually termed vivarium, and that's a different thing altogether. Um, Animals meaning mostly reptiles, insects, etc. The idea behind having terrarium is to kind of try and represent, like emulate the natural ecosystem in a closed environment. Um, and terrariums can be open or closed. So the picture that you see here is of an open setting. And there's definitely differences in how you set things up between an open and closed, which we look at. Um, so fundamentally, the difference between open and closed is just the environment that your plants will grow in, right? So in an open setting, you need plants that can thrive in like arid environments, because essentially the idea of terrarium is that, I mean, then it's like you could say open terrarium is essentially like whatever you have, like a pot in your garden. But the idea behind terrariums is to try and kind of emulate the natural ecosystem as much possible with as less intervention as necessary. So generally, in like open terrariums, you find people keeping things like succulents, um, because they mostly can store water, and hence you don't need to water to like very frequently. But then there are also other problems with this setup, which is you can kind of relate to your typical like your potting soil mix type setup. A closed system, however, it's a very different environment. It's because it's closed, it's almost always like humid and it's moist. So you need plants that can kind of thrive in such environments like tropicals. Um, but the idea behind the closed terrarium is that you don't need to water. We'll get to the science of that, which is, I mean, it's essentially very simple when you think of it. But the idea behind it is self-sustaining. You don't need to intervene at all. But even if you need to, it's very minimal, as and when necessary. And because it's also closed, just the the constituents of the terrarium also helps maintain a stable temperature inside, which just makes it an ideal environment for the plants, for plants that can grow in tropics. Um, so some origin history of this. So the first known terrarium was built by this physicist botanist, uh, Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward. This is one of those cases where it was actually invented or like discovered by someone else, but it wasn't popularized by that person. And then in like a um, in a different time, this person accidentally stumbled upon the concept of a terrarium, which the person was basically trying to understand the behavior of moths in a closed, sealed environment. And so, there's like he basically had all the relevant setting of a terrarium, although not the exact same. It's just basically some soil, and then just like um, having the I don't know what the term is, the moth in the pupal stage inside that glass jar type setting. And the idea was not even like this, just observe the behavior, but this person actually found a fern, and ferns are just like everywhere. A fern seedling in the jar, growing in like just growing by itself without having to water and like actually maintain anything. And along with this, the other things, right, where like you observe condensation on the glass walls, and you see the water getting cycled, and this is with zero human intervention. um, so this sort of he started experimenting with this and like trying to build like a case, like an ideal case to. So he was botanist, he was, I mean, he's a botanist, and he was sort of interested in learning about plants. So naturally, you can imagine that you would try to build cases for different types of plants. uh, but the bigger picture here is the invention that he came up with, the Wardian case, which roughly looks like what that diagram shows, which is extracted from a book that he wrote on the finding that he made. Um, so this Wardian case, this why this is important and why I'm actually mentioning this at all is because this sort of had a very big impact on both the field of botany as well as just economies. Because what this means, so earlier, um, before the Wardian case ever existed, transporting plants was a very big problem. So you could only transport them through like sea, and the climatic harsh climatic conditions made it difficult for these plants to survive the journeys, like especially if you're going across like continents. um, and in fact, I think the first use of the Wardian case was to transport plants from British to Australia. So if you think about it, that's a huge journey, and just carrying plants like that is like exposing it to like unstable temperatures, just harsh conditions. And so this what this enabled is essentially like a cocoon, right? It gives you like a sandbox environment, uh, which can maintain, which is not very affected by the outside conditions, as long as you give it the essential uh, you know the essential elements. It can just thrive by itself. And so this kind of paved way for botanists across the world to sort of share, transport native plants. And um, I think, yeah, this also kind of helped move um, uh, I mean, yeah, I don't remember this. This is, I didn't read too much about this, but a lot of important plans, and also in conservation. So, like plants that, so if you want to move plants that are native to some place and you want to kind of move it to a nursery, transporting it was a big problem. And so this helped kind of transport those kind of exotic plants into nurseries while keeping them intact. So some history there. Next, we'll kind of look at how it works. And the science is pretty simple, and things that we kind of already learned, we've learned in like high school. Um, so you have three things that make the whole terrarium setup work. You have the water cycle, gas exchange, and the nutrients. Water cycle essentially is what you can see. You start off, so when you kind of build a terrarium for the first time, you give it some water. So there's some human intervention. You're essentially seeding the ecosystem. That water then, like just exposure to light and heat, evaporates, condenses in the glass containers, and then percolates into the soil, and then this cycle keeps continuing. And this is relatively stable, right? And because it's a sealed environment, the water does not escape. So it can maintain this for a long period of time. Um, for example, the setup that I use, I I just sometimes just leave it for like a month and I don't even look at it, and it just does fine. Like there's no problem. Plants are healthy. So the cycle itself is pretty stable. But we'll come to like where human intervention might be required at the end. The other part is gas exchange. So because it's closed, you have there's obviously some air inside because when you before you closed, it's exposed to some air. So there's oxygen and carbon dioxide. But by because of photosynthesis and just respiration, the levels of carbon dioxide and oxygen kind of balance each other out, or ideally should balance to maintain a healthy ecosystem. And so photosynthesis only happens when there's light. So essentially, at night, when this process can't happen, it relies on. So during the day, it's kind of uh, tilted the other way. So the photosynthesis means that there's a lot more oxygen than carbon dioxide. But at night, when that does not happen, the respiration actually produces more carbon dioxide. And so that level, if you take on the entire day, it kind of balances itself out. Um, and also other like microorganisms in the soil kind of help with all of this. We'll get to that also later. And then the third thing is like nutrition, right, for the plants. So you don't kind of go with you like basically minimal human intervention, so you don't even start by putting some sort of whatever fertilizer or anything. um, so how it essentially works is the nitrogen cycle. If folks are familiar, this is kind of the same thing that happens in an aquarium, and why you can maintain a stable aquarium for a long period of time without a lot of intervention. What this essentially involves is uh, like plants. The plants kind of naturally decay over time. Some leaves and there's leaf matter and all of those things that fall into the soil, that gets decomposed by the microorganisms that are within the soil. That process produces ammonia, which this is sort of like a nanoparts thing. So in the first stage, the bacteria and fungi kind of produce ammonia, which the bacteria then converts to nitrite, which the bacteria then converts again to nitrate. And nitrate is what is essentially nutrient for plants. So the root basically absorbs nitrate. And so, again, it's self-sustaining in the sense that you don't have to kind of, a lot of times you don't have to go, unless it's like in a very bad state. You usually don't have to like worry about, oh, cutting. Generally, like if in your garden you see like leaves turning pale or like just brown and then falling off, you might clean them up or you trim them out, and let a new one grow in its place. So here you kind of don't intervene at all. You let the organisms do their thing, and then it naturally you wait for it to decompose, and then it eventually will provide nutrition back to the plants. So these three things are fundamentally what enable terrariums to be self-sustaining. um, so now that you've looked at some signs of how this works, we'll start looking at what we'll need to build a terrarium. So essentially, we need three layers. I mean, three layers, but this is just talking about the soil. The medium for growing plants, you obviously need plants. So you need a drainage layer, that's right at the bottom. You need a separation layer, and you need a soil or a substrate layer. So we'll look at generally what you would want for each of these layers. So the bottommost drainage layer, you essentially want it to drain the excess water, right? These things kind of are familiar if you're kind of if you have potted plants, and you would have a drainage layer. You would either put like clay balls or you would put like just stones. just so that the excess water has a place to drain to and not just like remain as it is and then like eventually cause your the roots to rot, which just kills the plant. So you have these four options. What I generally prefer is lava rock, because they kind of look good also, plus they do the job well. Um, and then you need a separation layer, because if you just have the drainage layer and then just put soil on top of it, the soil is going to like sort of just shape itself into the drainage layer, right? And so that's not what you want. Then it's essentially the drainage layer is moot. So you'd ideally want a separation layer, which you typically do with two, three things. I actually didn't mention the third thing. So you generally have like activated charcoal. This also helps deal balance the moisture. So apart from just separating the two layers, or in like very like budget friendly way, you can also use a mesh screen, like which you typically use for if you have done like mosquito net type things, or the things that you have for windows, right? That's essentially, you can just get a cutting of it and then put that works well. um, and the third thing, what I've seen people put, I've seen as in just internet, is just dry moss, and they put a lot of it, like they build a big layer in between, and so that uh, kind of, it's a more natural way. And if you can find a lot of moss in your backyard, then this is also like a budget friendly, um, like less things to buy. And then you have your soil and substrate layer. With potting soil should be obvious, like you have a mix. It's not just soil. You would have like some, I don't know, cocoa and some compost and stuff like that, essential nutrients. Or the other thing is you can also use aqua soil, which is a substrate, which is is kind of designed for an aquarium, because you can't just put soil, just plain soil in an aquarium, because the water will just be muddy all the time. um, so these substrates are essentially kind of uh, like dried soil balls. I don't know if you can kind of look up, and we can look it up at the end also. um, these are like this is your go-to soil layer thing for aquariums, but this also equally works well for terrariums. um, so that's the first thing, you understanding layers that you would need. And then you want to look at plants, right? And we kind of, I think we already covered the characteristics, the things you want to look for. You want to look for plants that thrive in humid moist environments. They are small but won't grow too long, because otherwise like you want it to be less human intervention, but you'll end up spending more time just trimming, which isn't, or worse, they'll just like grow too much that they'll block light and things for other plants. Um, Low to moderate light requirement, you generally don't want to keep a terrarium exposed to direct sunlight, because yeah, that kind of burns the leaves. It increases the temperature, makes the ecosystem unstable. So that's a no, and that I know from hard experience. Uh, Generally don't need a lot of nutrition, like low nutrient requirement, because you're not going to be adding fertilizers in any form. So like once you set up, you just let it be. You don't want to do anything to the setup except for like plants maybe. And generally non-invasive, so you don't want anything that is like a weed, right? Because that can just like hog all the resources and just kill everything else. So some things that work very well, uh, like the phytonias, the green and the red, they are just like, I mean, they are not meant to be for a terrarium. They are not terrarium plants. They are just your regular plants, but these are like water hungry. They love the like having high moisture, so they are great for terrariums. Like if nothing else, you can just get a small like whatever jar or something, just put some soil, put a phytonia in it, and you're good. Like that is a like it'll just thrive. Fern also the same way. because I mean we've seen insanely huge ferns growing out of nothing, like from the cracks of wells. That's how hardy ferns are. So they work well, but you can't use all ferns. The fern that I've shown here in particular, I don't remember its full name, but this is the one I have, and this is generally it that's the maximum height it can reach. So it's not going to grow beyond that, right? So even if it's healthy, like it'll like you might need to trim because it can spawn and it can like yeah, it'll grow heavy, like it'll go bushy, but it's not going to go tall. Moss also, I mean, like, yeah, it's kind of obvious they love this environment. And so anyone starting with terrarium generally go with like Fittonia or moss because they are the easiest to grow. Peperomia, I haven't tried it myself, but a lot of people, and by people I mean Redditors, swear by it for terrariums. And the last one, this Anubias, is sort of meant for aquariums. Um, but I mean, I tried it as an experiment uh, with the terrarium, and it works well. And why it works well is because this is a rhizome. By that, what I mean is you don't need soil for it. Like you don't need to place it in soil. It basically you can just place it on a rock or a piece of like driftwood is what you'd say in an aquarium, and it would just grow fine. Like it just needs that moisture. You can also put it underwater. That's also fine, but very low light requirement. It satisfies all the criteria, which is why I wanted to experiment, and it worked. Like in one, it didn't work out well because, but that is a different species of Anubias. But in one, it has worked well. Um, so generally, I think this is pretty hardy. Yeah, so these are things you should start with. The Fitonias are very easy to get here, like almost any nursery will probably have, or like fern, I don't have to say. You can probably just find it in your garden or whatever, like society or something. Um, so the final piece of like just making all of this work is having some sort of having some microorganisms is not exactly microorganisms, but having some what do you what is the category of this? Okay, but anyway, uh, microfauna, that's the general term. Basically janitors. They break down the plant matter. They just thrive on mold or like fungal spores and algae, which both look bad. um, so if you don't have these if you don't have these like missing out this term for them, but if you don't have them in your terrarium, then what you would end up doing is either because of say excess moisture or because of like exposing it to sunlight, you might have an explosion of algae, and that would kind of cover the walls because they'll kind of creep over the walls of your container. And if you don't, and left untouched, it will eventually just cover the walls completely, and it'll basically block the light for from entering in. And because thrive on these things, it's same principle for aquariums. So you would have to manually kind of use a tissue or something and then clean the walls. So basically more intervention. um, these creatures also like whatever their excretion is basically nutrients for the soil, so great. So in long term maintenance, and like if you don't want to intervene, or uh, you really just want to like let it go by itself, you don't want to touch it at all, then I think this is an important piece. uh, so the two most common uh, creatures you would put in these terrariums are springtails and isopods. Um, I mean, there's no size to scale, but they're very small. They are maybe springtails are maybe 1/10 the size of a sesame seed. or even lesser. No, no, not 1/10. Maybe, yeah, somewhere around there. A quarter the size of sesame. It's very hard to. These things actually exist, right? They would be there in your backyard. There's very high chances that your pot in the garden also has these, but because of their size, they are very hard to find. And even if you find them, they're very hard to catch, because you don't want to put the soil in. You just want to get these creatures out. Um, so what people typically do when they need this is some nice guy would actually take the pain to get these creatures out, and then they would try to build a culture of these, like similar to how you do for yeast or things, right? So like you just put a piece of wood, like make it moist, put a grain of rice, and then like seal it with like one or two springtail. And then because it's kind of it will start getting mold in very soon. These things thrive on mold. Um, it's their pizza. So they will very quickly multiply. And so these people just generally have big cultures at home. Like there are sellers, there are people you can actually go buy these online. Uh, but I mean, yeah, I wanted to get it, but it's quite hard to find in India. But I mean, Reddit, you can see people saying, "Oh, in my Delhi house, I have a few. Are you still looking?" So there are people geeky enough to kind of grow these, um, and yeah. So having this is kind of essential for if you're looking to not intervene at all and let it let the ecosystem go in autopilot for the long term. Uh, so I have in one of the smallest terrarium I have has a few springtails, but I don't know. It's like very lucky if I like find, and because the aqua soils are generally like dark gray black, you can still see, and these springtails are white, right? So you can, if you can spot these tiny white things moving, yeah, you can still see something. In soil it's very hard. You'd have to like look very very carefully. um so I mean, like, given like we have looked at different things, we have looked at like the layers of like the medium, we have looked at plants, and we looked at the fauna. um so essentially you would layer it up like this, like how I mentioned earlier already. And carbon fiber carbon fiber mesh, I don't know if there's a specific material. And yeah, it's, I just look at, think of window mesh. Go to any place you can find it and ask them to cut that size, and then you're good. Okay, last we can we'll look at some sort of just general maintenance care tips. You want to avoid exposure to direct sunlight at all costs. I did the mistake by I so when we went to Kerala, I kind of left this by the window and just went, and I was like, oh, Bangalore weather, it's fine. It's not going to get a lot of sunlight. But I came back to like a big uh, explosion of algae inside, and then I had to like spend a weekend just cleaning up the whole thing. So sunlight is a big no-no. It's the same with any, like if you have an aquarium or a pond. I mean, you've seen this, right? If you have ponds and things, you'll see the algae levels if the area gets a lot of sunlight. Um, the second thing, you ideally want to keep an eye on the condensation level, and this is especially important in the first few weeks because you're starting a new ecosystem, so there's bound to be some instability. So you need to keep a closer eye at least for like first 2 3 weeks, actually 3 4 weeks, and then it once you see the water cycles like consistent generally, and all the relevant things are happening, and you don't see any signs of um, uh, you know you don't see any warning red flags in general, like plants are healthy, uh, then you're good. Then you can just like not look at it at all. Oh, Petrichor is the smell. That's what it smells like. It smells like that, just more planty. I mean, yeah, I'm very used to this because I'm just fed up of cleaning algae in aquariums. So yeah, like by hand. So I know what it smells like, but I don't know how to. Yeah, it's just moist leaf smell or plant smell is what it is. Uh, so yeah, in the initial weeks, if the condensation level is low, you generally want to open and then kind of spray water along the walls. You don't want to spray it on the soil or the plants directly because that does not help. Like spraying it on the soil only makes the top layer wet. Um, you want to spray it along the side so that it percolates equally at all sides into the soil. Uh, and you ideally want to trim plants, especially let's say if you're using say artificial light. And generally you'll keep the art. Jeez, I didn't realize it was very dark. Okay. Uh, so you So if you're keeping an artificial light, you generally have it in a fixed position. And so, like as the plants get bigger, they'll just kind of stick to the top, and eventually they'll spread, and then like the light does not reach the plants below or the moss below, and then yeah, so that's a problem. So you'll have to keep trimming. It again depends on the size. If you have a pretty big jar, then you're pretty much good. But in small jars, and I kind of have all three sizes in some, so it's like very easy for like plants to just kind of just yeah completely cover the top. So this is kind of the gist. Then we can look at some bonus things. This is roughly my setup. You can see three of these different sizes. The small one, the jar, this is basically an IKEA jar. So very easy to get. And I think, yeah, there's some moss on the side. There's Fittonia, which I mentioned. The biggest jar, you can see it's quite foggy. Uh, that is how it should be usually. It should be kind of foggy and it should look like, yeah, that's what you should expect. And you should see clear water draw, like condensation. And generally, if the plants look good, you're doing good. So the biggest one has like ferns and like there's Anubias on the right side at the corner. That's growing healthy, but in the other one, the middle one, no, the middle one is the medium-sized one has an Anubias somewhere there. It's very small, but that is kind of almost dried up. So I have to like remove it over the weekend or something. So yeah, it's like it's an experiment anyway. Um, So the world's oldest known terrarium is by this guy's Bottle Garden in Surrey. Uh, he basically just built for the fun of it, just to see how it was more like an experiment. Like just put the plants in, put like just don't touch it ever, and see how long it can just survive by itself. Um, and so it was created in 1960, and then I think he last watered. I mentioned like however um, I mean, if you're keeping terrariums for the long term, you definitely have to intervene at some point to balance the water level because eventually the water level will start reducing and it might show up in like like your the plant health might uh, reflect that, and so you want to intervene and add some water and then just shut the lid and then you're good for another few months. But if you see, it was last watered in 1972 and it's still I think he's handed it over to I don't remember, but it's like a I don't know what to say. It's like a museum piece type thing. Uh, it's like yeah, more than 60 years old. And so yeah, this is the extent. I think the plant he's using here is spiderwort. That's like there's this Worth family, WORTH. Like there are a whole bunch of plants. If you see a plant with Worth at the end of it, it will grow very well, no matter the environment. Like for aquariums, for terrariums, it will grow well and like generally less maintenance. And yeah, that's mostly it. So other thing like so terrarium is along with terrarium, there are different types of environments. It's kind of branched like you have aquarium, which is just water, terrarium, which is just land, and then you have paludarium, which is a mix of both. Um, so generally, people build paludariums for like say turtles because they like to have a place to kind of rest that is not in water, and then they like to also go in the water. And then you have vivariums. I mean, you have different types. You have like ripariums, which kind of mimic the shoreline. You can just yeah search Google image search. You should see all of that. Uh, yeah, and vivariums, people put anything from um, geckos, salamanders, like tarantulas, snakes, mantis. Mantis is also very popular. I don't know why, but yeah, mantis is also a favorite. Um, yeah, and you can just look up all of these things. For people in Bangalore specifically, I think like there are two. If you want recommendations for starting and then like kind of building stuff out, I have where is yeah, there's this Life in a Bottle. Um, this in fact my bigger one was first like I had gotten it from here. Um, so I do this you do this thing where you get it once and then you can easily build a culture of these. Like you just cut it and put it somewhere else, and then you can like have an infinite supply essentially. So this is like a starter thing. But this is the one I had the biggest one that I showed in my setup is the one that had left by the window, and it just became like a it was just covered. It was just fully green. Um, and yeah, everything inside had died. There was not a lot inside. And then I kind of got some supplies and then rebuilt it. Um, so they have a WhatsApp channel. This is run by this person, Navya Appana. She has a WhatsApp group where you can see the entire catalog. And you can kind of buy. She does a nice job. And she's generally receptive. Like you just poke her and be like, "Hey, what if I try this? And what if I do this?" And then she'll like kind of respond or give like insights or things like that. The other place, this is my go-to place for supplies, Air Plant Planet. They are located in Brookfield here, but they also ship across India. So all the plants that I have, I think 95% of them are from here. They have like full aquarium, terrarium, everything set up. If you go to the store, actually you can check Google Maps. You can see like they have a nice display of aquariums and terrariums in their shop. So this is a good place. Yeah, and that's mostly it. Is there any question? How often do you need to tend? Oh, this is with respect to watering. I can't hear you. Oh, while Provanshu is sorting this out, this is the live view of. You can't see because it's blurred. How do I change that? OpenFX. Don't blur. How do I say don't blur? Okay, this is this any better? Yeah, it's right next to my yeah workstation. It's a nice. If you're setting it up, highly recommend putting it. next to your workstation. It's like therapeutic at times.
Kiran, you can remove, like, use apply visual effects and there check if you have blur background, then show the picture. It wasn't clear the first time.
Yeah, it there's only two options, slightly blur and blur. There's no like remove blur. How do you? Oh, remove all. Okay, gotcha.
Nice.
Yeah,
Do you always
yeah.
turn the light? Like,
So I use a this thing programmable socket, and so it has like every day at 7 a.m. it'll turn on, so the light turns on, and every day at 7 p.m. it turns off. So if you're doing artificial light, having a consistent routine is great. With like natural light, though, you always have a schedule, nature schedule, so it works. Prabhanshu, can't hear you still.
hey, also about the moss, did you outsource the moss from this air planet folks?
Yeah, yeah.
Got it.
It's
Also, how did
weird.
you?
Like I am from Kerala, where you can just find moss any damn place you want to. But here you actually have to pay money and buy. It's like,
How did
but
you
yeah,
clean the
you get like
algae
a
though?
packet. Oh, you just take a tissue and wipe. Yeah,
Got
that's
it.
why you need to have like the smallest one has, but it's like very hard to see. It's way too tiny. But every once in a while, when I'm like tending to it, you'll suddenly see like a small white thing moving. Like because the background is dark, it's still easier to spot. But I mean, the other two have some soil in it, so the it must be there somewhere. I just don't know where. Oh,
Hello, hello.
yeah, I
Hello.
can hear you now.
Oh, uh, what was he asking? I forgot.
Mm,
That has also disappeared.
what were you asking about
Wait,
how
I was
of
going to ask, yeah, about anything, I guess, like trimming, cleaning, uh, moving things around.
mm, trimming I've almost never done. So this so some things like I said this is kind of a function of how big your terrarium enclosure is. Like if it's big enough, like the biggest one I have, I know that these plants are not going to grow to that height. Uh, so generally it's fine. If you want to have a like it depends on the aesthetic, right? If you don't want it to get like very bushy and very crowded, then you might trim just to keep it clean. Um, if you kind of if you want that bushy feel, then you might just let it grow. So there's like I'll show you this one. This is a very good example. Uh, how this apply visual effects, right? Apply, remove. Okay. Can you see this?
Yeah,
Can you see this?
yes.
Uh, do you see
Yes.
how the roots are just hanging in air? I mean, it's not like root. Might not be easy to see. They're just like in air, like they're not rooted in the soil. That's how they spread. So it looks like a tree, and it'll eventually like sort of widen, and then like it'll root, and then like the like banyan tree setup type thing, but it just keeps getting wider. So it'll get bushier, but that is the look I was going for, like a tree, and then like moss. So it's like that's so it works well. But on the other hand, if you see the fern, can see this thing is actually touching the top because it's grown big enough. So I'll need to trim that. Yeah, so it it very much depends on the setup. The biggest one I've almost never touched. I just kind of let it remain.
What about
Uh,
insects, Kiran? Did you add insects?
the smallest one has actually, because when I got it, they had given me this setup like with the soil and everything. So if you see here, they were going for a different look where there's here's it's like sandy type thing,
Hmm.
and then you have like a
Okay.
house here, and then like behind there's some background. So yeah, that was like a look they're going for. So while I was looking at it in the store, I saw some one or two springtails moving around. So I know that they definitely are there inside. But the other two, I don't. I mean, yeah, I don't know for sure. Like they both have soil, so very high chance that they both have springtails. Isopods, though, you can still notice that they don't have. Oh, people actually also put snails, like tiny, tiny, like they have tiny snails, which don't like you have specific snails. I don't know if they are like artificially bred that way, but they basically poop very less. In contrast, if you have seen those wild snails in aquariums, all they do is poop. So it's huh, nice. Yeah.
Nice.
Oh, just I can. I don't know if you guys have heard of Serpa design. Um, it's my Serpa design. I'll just show this. This is only like if you like spending time looking at stuff that you know will never build. So he kind of does figures out different ways to build these kind of setups. So this is a paludarium because it has both like it's not fully covered in water. This kind of yeah, you're kind of going for like you have fishes here, but you could have like a turtle, and generally you'll put like stones and put like a resting place for the turtle and stuff. But what he basically does is builds, yeah. Oh yeah, look at that. This is yeah. These are all isopods. I don't know if this is also artificially bred because I know, for example, I don't know if you have seen cherry shrimps. Um, they are mostly used for like this is not the regular color. Right? This is not how a shrimp is like, and this is not the only color. If you just look at cherry shrimps, you'll have you'll have a color catalog: orange, blue, black, white, gold. These are kind of artificially bred. So I don't know how they kind of, yeah, I don't know how they kind of just fiddle with it so that it acquires that color. They also do that with many fish. Like this is an example, we do tetra. Yeah, this is not how. Yeah, this is just too good to be true almost. Like this is not how it is like. Widow tetras are actually colorless, all like yeah, with like very dull colors, but these are like artificially bred to have these colors. Basically, just to attract people to buy them. Um, yeah, so he does these things. There's like an episode where he builds um, an aquarium in the workstation. So this is the level you are at. You have your keyboard here, and then he like creates an enclosure underneath, like wood, and then in there glass, and then there's an aquarium. So you can like look from above and you can see the aquarium while you're working. So he does all these crazy things. Um, like he builds ponds and like yeah. Oh yeah, he has a. Oh yeah, this is actually what I wanted to show. Yeah. Oh yeah, this is exactly what I wanted to show. So he does this from scratch, like builds the wooden table, all of that. There are all these videos are there on YouTube. Yeah, you can see stuff like this. So this is kind of fun. It's therapeutic to see how he builds all of this from scratch. Um, yeah, there is stuff like this. People build like different. You can build like different vibes. People build like this Zen garden type setup, or like a temple monk temple, like Chinese temple setup things. Yeah,
Hey Kiran, just a curious question. Will an earthworm be able to exist inside a terrarium?
I don't know actually. Uh, Hmm. It's a good question, but not sure. So these tiny ones usually will have frogs. These are mostly designed for frogs. So you see
Oh,
you generally try to make it be very natural. And yeah, you would keep it closed or open. I mean, generally you would want it closed, like nothing in there. Uh, yeah, and then you have these huge ones. You potentially might have like snakes and stuff. So yeah, this is fun. I actually started with aquascapes because that's where my interest is. And then, yeah, you see the kind of things like, yeah, people do this. It's a different feel. Or this. Is that what? Yeah, in a way, yeah.